Hey guys, welcome to my channel. We are going to talk about Greek mythology, specifically some gods and goddesses today. First off, let's make sure we all have a common understanding of mythology, because I know all of you are coming from different middle school teachers with a different approach to this subject. So for our purposes, we are using mythology to talk about ancient stories that were used similarly to the way we think of religion being used today. They served three purposes that religion also serves. One was to explain the world, the second was to instruct or guide behavior, and the third is to give a sense of community to people who shared these stories. They belong to the oral tradition, much like folklore, legends, poems, songs. This is a tradition that existed all over the world. Oral stories were available to people and cultures lacking literacy. Uh, Human civilization is much older than writing, which means that there were hundreds of thousands of years there where there was no writing, but people were still transmitting stories, which meant the only way to do it was through speech. Stories were entertaining, and they also helped to keep culture and history alive from one generation to the next. Let's look at some archetypes and symbols. An archetype is an image that shows up in world literature over and over again. It is usually found across cultures, across eras, across time periods, and they're often a symbol for a common human experience or fear. They're almost used as like a shortcut to say something that we don't have time to say. So here are some examples of archetypes. The Great Flood or fire. We have things like Noah's Ark. Great floods appear in cultural traditions from around the world, from across world history. We have the serpent, and you're going to be writing over on the side some examples of serpents that you have seen in stories from your experience. Numbers, in particular, threes, sevens, and 12s. So take a minute to brainstorm, because you're going to be writing down some threes, sevens, and 12s you have seen in stories and other types of media in your experience. The woman who brings evil into the world is another very common archetype. Eve is the kind of Western pinnacle of this woman who introduced evil to the world, but there is another one in Greek mythology we will be talking about as well. And then finally, everyone's favorite is incest. We're going to talk more about this in class, but world cultures are a little bit preoccupied with incest, and it tends to take many forms in our readings and our stories. You're going to see a couple examples in just a minute here today. So mythology in the Greeks were some of the first people to give their gods human bodies and human characteristics. In general, gods for other cultures tended to be kind of abstract ideas like the wind or the sun. And the Greeks were the first to decide, like, no, the god of the sun is a human-shaped person who has human-type emotions. Greek gods could fall in love, they could be angry, they could seek revenge, they could be bribed, tricked, just like humans. And Greeks gauged their behavior by what would or would not please the gods, but given how flawed those gods were, that might not be the best way to gauge behavior, and we'll see some of that in our readings. We have three types of Greek myths. The first is explanatory. So these are the myths that explain things about the world. They explain natural phenomena like thunder or lightning or volcanoes. We have the myth of Persephone and Hades, which you'll be reading shortly, but basically it explains where the springtime comes from. And the myth of Pandora, which explains where evil comes from. We have myths that are instructional, and that give some general guidelines about how to or not to behave, like the myth of Icarus and Daedalus, which is literally where we get the expression, don't fly too close to the sun. And we have myths that are purely for entertainment's sake, because people like to watch people struggle. So Theseus and Hercules are myths that would have been delivered mainly as kind of a fun bedtime story without much of a message to them necessarily. So Greek mythology has kind of two phases, two sets of supernatural beings. The first is the Titans. The Titans existed before the Greek gods that we probably more commonly know. The head of the Titans, the first one, is Gaia, the earth goddess, who made the rest of the Titans by mating with her son, Uranus. Told you incest was coming. Uranus was the first ruler. He was the sky god, and he was dethroned by Cronus. Cronus fathered the first of the Olympians, who are the rulers who took over from the Titans. We'll talk about them in a minute. He swallowed all of his children except for Zeus, because he had heard a prophecy that his children would overthrow him, and to keep it from coming true, he ate them all. Prometheus was a Titan who was fond of man. He created fire and actually gave it to man, according to myth. And Atlas, who was punished with having to hold the world on his back. And is also where we get the word Atlas that we still use today. The Olympians, as you just saw, were offspring of the Titans, and they are the gods that you are probably more familiar with. They were led by Zeus to go and overthrow the Titans in a war to control the universe. After they succeeded, Zeus and his brothers split the world into territories to control. Zeus was commander of the earth and sky. Poseidon became the commander of the sea, and Hades became the commander of the underworld. Important note, we are used to thinking of the underworld as being like hell. The underworld would not necessarily have been a bad place. It was just very like you are either alive here or you are dead in the underworld. It was not a punishment. It was not a place of judgment. It was just where you go when you died. Here's a family tree if you were having trouble keeping track. So you can see Gaia here. She is the first of the Olympians. Here is her son Uranus. She and her son have all of these guys. Cyclope, I'm not even going to try. Cronus and Rhea, a couple others. And then Cronus and Rhea have a bunch of the ones that we know better. So this is where Hades, Poseidon, Zeus, Persephone, some of those gods that we're more familiar with coming down here. So the Titans are just the ancestors of the Olympians, and the Olympians are the Greek gods that we are a little more familiar with in general. Okay. All right. We have 12 major Olympians. You need to have these down. I'll talk a little bit about each, but feel free to pause the video so you can get your notes fully completed without having to be distracted by my voice. So we've got Aphrodite, also known as Venus, goddess of love and beauty. Apollo, god of sun and music. Ares, also known as Mars, god of war. Artemis, also known as Diana, goddess of the moon and the hunt. Athena, also known as Minerva, goddess of wisdom and war. Demeter, also known as Ceres, goddess of agriculture. Dionysus, also known as Bacchus, god of wine and pleasure. Hephaestus or Vulcan, god of fire and the forge. Hera or Juno, queen of the gods. Hermes or Mercury, messenger of the gods. Poseidon or Neptune, god of the sea. And Zeus or Jupiter, king of the gods. Make sure you have those down. Pause if you need to. I will be here when you finish. Here are some bonus gods included mainly for your viewing pleasure. You'll notice where a lot of overlap with words or stories that you may already know. That's mainly the reason I included them here. So copy down the ones that you think are interesting, because that's really what they're here for. And finally, before you finish today, look back at your notes. You've got a picture here, and over on the side, you are going to try to identify all of these gods and goddesses using what you know about their symbols and their role. You should have enough information to label all of them. Just put a little description if you're having trouble identifying which is which in your writing, since you can't actually write on this paper. And when you are done, you're going to hit submit, and welcome to the world of Greek mythology.